Hi, Andy.
Hey, Chimdi, thanks for having me.
Good to have you on this session. My name is Chimde. For everyone here, I am part of the Meta Horizon Creator Program, and I'll be hosting Andy as he answers your burning questions that you have submitted around game design. Awesome. Okay. Before we jump into the first question, you mentioned in your Connect talk about your passion in using education and games to build communities. Could you walk the audience through what started that? Like, what was that eureka moment for you when that happened? Like, what was it? Can you just help us understand better what that, I mean, how that started?
Sure. So I guess throughout my career, I've kind of bounced between education and games design, games development. So like I'm always like I've been at the very edges of those 2 points as well, like from full on teaching to full on game dev. And so like I found that there's this kind of area that I really like to hang out. So game design and education, I think, are incredibly powerful tools to sort of bring people together. Well, making games is like such a multidisciplinary activity. It's like the ultimate creative expression because it requires so many different sort of like disciplines, so many masters of their craft. You have like people who can script and very logical scripting and that kind of thing, all the way to like the environment building, the art, the story of a world, the thinking about the game design, about what people are going to be doing in the game, like the creativity around all of that. So there's so many different like facets to making a game, that doing it on your own is awesome because you get to experience these different things. But it's so much more fun when you do it with other people because you can then bounce off each other. You can rely on each other to be specialists in different areas. And I think because of that, games is like this ultimate way to sort of bring people together. So the actual process of making games is what I love, is that bit where you haven't yet finished it and you're all like jamming ideas, you're working together, you're building relationships and essentially like all joining forces to achieve some kind of like creative conclusion. And what's great about if you focus on the process of that and of like enjoying building games together, it doesn't, sometimes you can get to the end of that and you can have finished your game and actually you've already won because you've already had like great experiences, you've already made friends, you've already done something cool and fun together. Like actually like after that, and if it ships and like goes out to the world and whether it like does well or doesn't do that well, it doesn't really matter at that point because it's all about like getting to that. Like so like I'm very, very passionate about the whole process of making games and then like incorporating lots of different ideas, lots of different walks of life, essentially, bringing people together. Because if you're just making a game on your own and your own ideas, that's wonderful. Like it can be your own creative thing that you're looking after, but there's an opportunity there to like really explore what other people like have ideas about. So there's this whole community part of it that like a game studio will have lots of different walks of life and lots of different people working on one thing all together. And it's just a really exciting thing to do. And I also think like you don't necessarily have to be an absolute master of your craft. You can just be like completely new to making games and still get something huge out of working on something small together with other people who are also completely new. It's a challenge to put a game together. It is not an easy thing, and actually like when you feel like you're done 90% of the work, you still have probably the same amount of time left to like get it polished and nice at the end of it. And so that creates that sort of struggle together, that shared creative vision is amazing for that. Now education and games are like seemingly they're kind of different topics. But there's a great book by, it's called A Theory of Fun by Raf Costa, which I recommend to people. And it's essentially about how game design is about kind of trickling ideas and learning how to use mechanics and gating things so that people can't progress beyond a certain point without having mastered something. like all of these ideas that actually are completely reflected in education. So education and game design actually share quite a lot of things in common. They're not like separate. They're still about people. It's about giving people an experience. It's about teaching people how to do something. It's about making sure that it's engaging, and by engaging I mean fulfilling, satisfying, and all the rest of it. So yeah, games and education, I feel like they're actually, whilst they seem different, they're really closely linked, and they actually bring people together. That creative endeavor brings people together, and then you get something that is playable at the end of it, which is also bringing people together. They can jump in with their friends and they can play together, and or even if they can't jump in with their friends, they can share stories about what happened in their game, and that kind of thing. So it's just building like connections of people, and games, specifically games, because it's so multidisciplinary, and then tying in education. So yeah, that's my passion. That's what I love, and I love investigating that and working with lots of different people to see what happens with that.
Wow, that's really inspiring. And I mean, it makes me think about, there's a saying that I'm familiar with that says that it takes a village to raise a child, or it takes a community to raise a child. And I think it's similar to game design as well, like you mentioned, like bringing everyone together with your different expertise and skill set to help create something amazing, something beyond an individual. And that's why our program exists, to help bring different creators with different expertise together to make something amazing, something more than one individual. That's awesome. We'll get into the first question. What are some additional ways to award and retain players in a game? I know in your Connect talk, you mentioned about different ways to motivate people in a game. I think this person is asking, what are some additional ways on top of that to award and retain players in a game? You want to take that?
Yeah. This is, I really love this question, because it's kind of like building on top of what we already talked about. When I was delivering the talk about game design. So I think what I'm going to do at this point is share my screen, because I've got the one of the slides from the presentation I gave up here. So I'm just going to share my screen. So in this screen, I talked about these 4 key areas that I talked about, which dive a little bit deeper from just a leaderboard, and it's really driving into like, why do people do stuff? And so we talked about curiosity, talked about self-belief and achievement, creativity and self-expression, and self-esteem and status. And so like, just to build a little bit more on top of that, it's not really these aren't things that you necessarily want to be trying to squeeze into your game. This is stuff like, this isn't how games work. This is how humans work. And so these are, instead of thinking of these as like, oh, I need to get this thing in or this thing in, it's more about like using them as lenses to view the games that you're making already, so that you're kind of, you're going into your game, you're like, okay, so I've made something, I don't know, I've made a driving game and you can drive around. So what does how does someone who is motivated by curiosity, how do I like build something that will encourage that curiosity into my game? And then looking at it through this lens of, what is a curious player going to want to do? They might, in a car driving game, they might want to have lots of different areas of the map. They might also want to have lots of different cars. They might want to have, lots of different ways of driving, all of that kind of stuff. So it's kind of taking these sorts of ideas and using them as lenses. On top of that, I think after the talk I gave before, Morgul made a really good point about sort of building value in the things that you're making. And this is like another really key part of getting people to come back, is having like a low bar to start like getting things, or I don't know, whatever they might be, having experiences or earning rewards or whatever it might be, having that low bar so people can really easily get in there and start playing and earning things and feeling like they're achieving something, getting something fulfilling out of it. But also having like, you can have like an incredibly high ceiling to that, like where you you can ask a lot of your players because players need a reason to come back, right? But they need like those top things that those things that might take hours to get hold of. They can really drive people to sort of if they see someone in that world who's earned that, they can be like, wow, you've really worked hard at this game. That's amazing. And it's also like a bit of an incentive to like go, oh, one day I'll get that if I keep coming back, and then sort of drip feeding things in between the high ceiling and the low bar. So like having like something that's quite high up that takes a while to get, that can feel quite valuable once someone is already engaged in the game and likes earning all the different things that they can do, all the rewards they can get, whether it's like hats or different areas of a map or whatever it is. So that's something that like is quite interesting to explore, is this idea of unfinished business. Like how do you get a player to always have a job to be done? They accomplish something, but then immediately the next job opens up, so that there's always something interesting to do next, or having multiple things to do all at once. That's like a bit of a dangerous game to play with your players, but it's fun because you don't want to overwhelm them by giving them loads of stuff, but like giving them like one or two things at the start and then gradually increasing the amount of quests or challenges or rewards that they can be searching for as they continue, so that at any one time they might be close to achieving one thing, they might be halfway on a journey to another thing, they might be just starting this journey to another thing. So this like idea of unfinished business, this idea of adding value to items in the game because of how much or how difficult it is to get hold of them, that kind of scarcity or that kind of time that a player would need to invest. So lots of different kind of ideas around this. And then there's also like, how do you, another way to approach this is to even like take a step back from actually thinking, ignore the theme, ignore like the game mechanics, thinking about like the retention part or these motivators first. And so like you can come at it from having a game that's already built and going through it with a lens like I talked about, or you could already be thinking, you could start with one of those as your starting point for a game. Like what happens if I want to design a game that is just about curiosity? What does that game look like? What does curiosity mean to me or my team, or or the people that I want to make the game for, the audience that I want to make the game for? That's like another way into this. So these are just ideas to sort of prompt like how you might want to think about designing a game. I should say, like, I should caveat all of this by saying like these aren't rules, just ways in. Yeah, I think that hopefully that answers the question. That's a couple of ideas that you might be able to take from this. There's great games out already that sort of use some of these. So like some of the ones I talked about before, for example, was like Earth Battling Gym for like unlocking like a different area of the map when you build the thing, the rock monster at the back, that kind of stuff. Like having access to that different area of the map, it's just driving people to want to come back and achieve that stuff.
Well, that's amazing. Actually took something out of what you said as well. I mean, if you build value into what you're making, then people will come back to it. People want things that will give them value in what they are doing. So value actually creates that engagement, that retention, the habit of coming back. So that's really powerful. For our next question, once you've created a solid foundation for your video game and you've already built a community, what's the best way to introduce new mechanics without upsetting users, right? You're introducing new stuff to retain people, but how do you make sure that you don't upset existing users while you're introducing these new things? So yeah, do you have any response to that?
Yeah, this is fun too, because this is like, you've already crossed the hard part. If you've got people coming into your world and they keep coming back, that's like an amazing place to be, and you should be super proud that you got to that point. That's just awesome. In terms of like running, so you're at that point, you're no longer in a stage where you're trying, you know that you're onboarding, like getting your players into your world works, right? And this is that, so you can kind of go, that works really nicely, and people are coming in. Now you're in the stage of operating the game as a live service. So you're essentially like, your job now is to maintain the game, fix bugs and that kind of thing, but also keep it interesting and keep people coming back. And this is like a really fun area to be. How do you like keep your players when you're making changes to your game? Essentially, how do you like not annoy people? So this is this is kind of interesting. So there's lots of different ways of doing this. There's like, you can do something as simple as cloning your world, adding some mechanics, and then sending it out and asking people to play test it. If you clone the world and stick a beta tag on it or something like that, and just say, look, this isn't a polished, finished thing. I'm just trying to learn whether this kind of thing works. That's a really great way of doing it, because what you're doing by throwing that game out there is you're involving your community in the direction of the game. Once you put a game out into the world, it's being taken by a community of players, and it means something to them that you may or may not really understand, like what it really means to them. They, at that point, they might be meeting up with their buddies that they don't get to see very often every week to play your one game. And so if you start changing that, like, it can be a bit scary for them. But if they're involved in that change and you're like saying, hey, I'm going to beta test this at 6 till 7 on Thursday evening. Come along, try it out, and let me know what you think. All of a sudden, they're now a part of your game development process. So you're building a relationship with them that's sort of, it is through your game, but they feel involved. And if you then listen to their feedback or take on board their feedback, or even like listen to it and say why you've chosen this direction or that direction, that's the stuff that that building that community, that accentuates the trust between you as a game designer and your players and your community, right? So it's super important to sort of involve them and listen to them. And so, yeah, and finding ways to get feedback from your community that are interesting as well. That's a whole fun thing you can do. Like, you can put out, your experiment and then just put out a survey, or you could make a mechanic in your game that, like, I don't know, has a leaderboard in it, and then you can have a look at the leaderboard and it says how many people liked it or not liked it or whatever it is. Like, you can play around with the mechanic of how you're going to get that feedback in a really fun and creative way too. It could be a survey, but it also could be just, reacting to different questions in Discord and emojis, all that sort of stuff. Another strategy that you can use to approach this is by not just shipping new mechanics on their own. So you see this a lot in games, and there's a reason that they do this. It's like tying in those mechanics with like other stuff, new areas of a map, or new outfits that you can get, or new quests. It's like you can package it all up as like a season or an episode or whatever it might be in the context of your game, and then put that out there. And when you do that with a season, for example, your players know, because it's a season, that it's not necessarily forever. And so that can help them taking in a new mechanic and feel like less like, oh, the game is changing forever, and more like, oh, this is a fun 3 weeks that we're going to spend, around the festive season. It's like, it's got a whole new snow theme, and there's this fun mechanic where I get to play with a snowman or whatever it is. Like, that way of like crafting your updates as a little package that's like a season, but maybe not forever, can be really useful. It might be that the mechanic itself, it might be that it works really, really well, and then your season finishes, but you can keep hold of the fact that that mechanic works well, and you can bring that back in another season, or you can just then take that and implement it into your game afterwards. So this is like a really nice way of essentially running an experiment without alienating your players. A key question when you're looking at how do you update a game without alienating players or making them upset or whatever it is who is that update for? Is it a thing to raise the ceiling so that those experts can like still have a reason to come into your game, or is it like you've noticed that new players to the game are struggling? And so that question of like who is the update for is really key for figuring out how early that mechanic or that thing needs to be implemented in the game. Like if it's something for the experts of the game to essentially pull them even higher, it might be that it can be an optional thing. You don't need it for the core gameplay, but it just adds something to the game. So an example of this would be like if you have an area of your map and you can gate it off so that only experts can get to that bit, and in that area is this new mechanic, this new thing. Or it might be, more like a mechanic to help new people, in which case it could be like a have you played this before, yes no kind of thing, and if you go through this door, if you've played before you go through this door, if you haven't, and you can introduce it in a nice like easy way to new people. So like asking who the game update is for. If it's something like tweaking, I don't know, let's say you've got a game where it's a combat game, you've got different weapons, and you want to tweak the balance of the weapons without upsetting someone who just loves using only this weapon. This is like really important for a combat game, is like to keep it fresh. You do have to change things, because otherwise people learn, like we're amazing learners, humans are amazing learners, and they will figure out a strategy and then they will just keep doing that, and can end up being not fun for anyone else because they know they'll win by doing this one thing. So you see this in a lot of games where they will change the parameters of the weapons so that they are slightly different, forcing people to use, to relearn essentially and refigure out new strategies. And whilst they might get upset, you're actually giving them more longevity in the game. So it's tricky. It's also about measuring that, and how do you measure that. But if people are like playing your game and you're making changes and they're getting upset about them, one, you can definitely like listen to them and make sure they feel heard. But two, also like listen to what everyone is saying and what the experience is like, and look at your numbers. Like if you make a change and you find that time spent in your game or the number of visitors isn't dropping or it's growing, you kind of you can listen to the people who are saying it's not working for them and see if you can make some tweaks to it, but that it's successful. So like looking at the data is just as important as listening to that.
No, that's so detailed. Thanks for answering that. I think what I'm picking from here as well is that building a game is a two-way process. It's not just you building, but you also need to build with people that you're building for, and involve the community as you do so. So it's a two-way process, and have different ways of gathering those feedback. It could be through, like you said, feedback system, get the community involved. And one thing I love about this as well is that they could become your advocates as well. If you involve them early, they could become your advocates and also even teach others. So that's really awesome. Next question that we have here: are procedural generated worlds the future of all gaming?
Procedural generation, it's an interesting statement. I feel like it's as much like a prompt for debate as it is a question for like, what do I do with procedural generation? My take on this, and this is like just me as a game designer, I'm not necessarily like the whole games industry would agree with this. So this is just going to be a kind of my opinion, but procedural generation is amazing, right? It's really good for like offering variety and extending the longevity of a game. Like having the ability to go into a world and it not be the same twice is awesome. That said, I do think that in terms of like game mechanics, there's something you can do that's really powerful in a game where it's you have the chance as a creator to lead a player through an experience that you want to take them through and get them to like experience a range of emotions and stuff like that. Like you can do that in procedural generation, but you can also do it through, you know, like highly curated experiences that gradually like take players through, you know, that scenario. So I don't think it's like a one or the other. I think procedural generation is a great tool for like in the right situation. It's a great tool for yeah, essentially like another way to extend the longevity of your game. If you are playing with procedural generation, I think it's a lot harder to make sure that your mechanics have to be super tight, because actually you can end up in a procedural like generated world and it feel very, very samey, because in the game designer's head, like, oh, this will never be the same twice. But actually, because the moments that you need to play in it are always the same, like, oh, this is the tile where I have to hit this box, and this is the tile where I have to pick the box up and put it in there. Like, if it's that kind of procedural generation, it can actually get kind of samey and less interesting. So yeah, and I like to think about like writing as well. So, you know, we could get procedurally generated novels, but we don't, because like reading what someone has written and they've crafted that and curated that and made it so that their reader will experience this thing. Like it's one of those things that it's like it's just another tool. And yeah, the sort of the relationship between the game designer and the audience as well. Like if it depends on the type of game. Like if the audience is expecting this, you could use procedural generation in an interesting way that hasn't been used before. But ultimately, you know, you're the creator, so you get to decide this. And if you think that it's going to benefit your game, go for it. If you think that you're going to end up in a scripting wormhole where you're literally just making a procedural generation algorithm rather than an actual game, like that is I've been there. So like that's a place like that's very easy to find. It's a lot harder to get out of. So yeah, just like a word of warning with procedural generation is like it's not the be all and end all. It is a great tool to explore creatively.
No, thanks for answering that. And also, I'm sure this also could be an exercise for all our creators in the room as well. Maybe take it offline as well. What are your thoughts on procedural generated worlds as well? Go to MHCB Discord server. Talk about it. Let's hear your thoughts as well on that. I mean, that's an awesome topic. Andy, I think we've gone through 3 questions, but it feels like we've been here for a while. I mean, you've been giving us like some meaty insights into game design. The next question that we have here, I think it's also more around gamification, but it says, what is your preferred scoring method? For instance, if you have a hide and seek game, 14 players, one winner who hides it on gets like 1,500 points, all tags 100 points. Like if one person was able to tag 13 people, they could get like 1,300 points. Like, what's your preferred scoring method when building games?
Scoring methods when building games is another. It's a cool topic. It's something I probably haven't like thought about enough. According like when I heard that question, I'm like, it's something that yeah, it's when I'm designing a game or in game design, I guess as a field, like the scoring part of it is there to make sure that players feel like they're doing something fulfilling, right? Like it's the actions that players take in the game should result in some kind of fulfilling reward. So the numbers are there to sort of just accentuate that. They're there to the score is there to make sure that your players feel like they are being rewarded. The numbers themselves don't actually mean anything unless you've got that value added to them. So like, you know, I could shoot 100 boxes in a world, but if they're all just in front of me and I get 1 point for shooting each box, like 100 boxes is probably a pretty low score. If they're moving around and it's hard to spot them, and some of them sneak up behind you, and all of that sort of stuff, then it's that 100 is like, wow, oh my goodness, you've shot 100 boxes. Like, so you see like how the scoring method relies on the game designer creating some kind of value to those points. There's also like, I guess, two key things when we're talking about numbers. One is like, there's two like ways of doing this. So you can have a continuous number, which would, for me as a game developer, I would just go for a number between 0 and 1, and then multiply it by something which makes sense in that world environment. So, you know, how far along a racetrack are you? 0's at the start, 1's at the end. You know, you can then multiply it by a distance, maybe like miles or something like that, or feet if it's a running race. So like, you know, you can have that 0 to 1 part. The other way of measuring or adding a score to a game is to sort of do it in a discrete way. So there's continuous and discrete, and discrete would be a fixed amount of things for different things. So it could be like, have you turned that switch on? Yes or no. Have you turned this one on? Yes or no. Which color, red, green, or blue? Like that kind of scoring mechanism. So there's like loads of different ways to score stuff. It needs to make sense to your game. It needs to feel fulfilling to your player. And ultimately, it doesn't matter hugely like how many hundreds or thousands or millions of points it is, or how many seconds it is, as long as it makes sense, and as long as you're using the same system throughout. As long as it's not like you get 1 point for shooting this box and then 1,000 for doing this sphere over here, unless it makes sense in your world. But do you know what I mean? Like, I guess what I'm saying is go with what your gut tells you. If you're like going shooting a box and you get 1 point, but it's really hard, maybe make it 100 points and see if that feels better, and see if you get a better response. But that's one of the fun things you can play around with, like how, you know, when you send it out to test, if it's maybe players aren't finding it very satisfying, maybe you can ask them, all right, let's try it by timesing all the points by 100 and see if it's more satisfying. Oh, and add some more sound effects and, you know, some explosions and that kind of thing.
Amazing. Right now we'll go into some of the live questions that have been sent in. I think people are excited. They're dropping in their questions here and there. So let's take a few live questions as we continue. The next question here says, Andy, at House Call VR, we are working on a health-themed educational content in Horizon Worlds. With your specific background in education, what would you say is the most important part of designing an immersive educational game?
In VR, you are already winning with immersion, because the player is completely immersed in your world. That's all they can see and hear. So in terms of like immersive, you're kind of already there. For a game to work as an educational thing, my strategy has always been to try and see if you can tie the game mechanics and the doing part of the game in with the learning outcomes. So it's not like you do a thing and then you get rewarded with a text box that tells you something. It's more like teaching someone to play golf by giving them a golf club and a ball, and then gradually increasing the complexity of the game. So starts really easy, gets harder and harder and harder. So like tying in those game mechanics, and it doesn't necessarily need to be like a physical activity. It can be a way of thinking. So for example, if you wanted to, I'm just riffing off the top of my head, but if you're looking at like educating or helping people understand different walks of life or different ideas, maybe you're like putting them in different situations that might be comparable to some other situations, obviously involving the people that might be experiencing them. So there's actually a really good educational world in Horizon Worlds, which is the Titanic simulator. I mean, it's a little bit scary, but it's like one of those things where when I arrived in that world, I didn't really get the gravity of what that would look like until I'm there, and it's terrifying when you're on board. It's actually like educational in the way that it's teaching you some of the emotions that might have been experienced for the people on that. So on that ship. So like that's the other thing about education, right? Like tying people remember things better. Humans remember things better if they've got an emotional attachment to it. So driving like a really emotive moment like that can help people to remember things. The most important thing, after all, is that all I've said about that. The most important thing I think is making sure that the player can easily access the game and the educational content. Trying to tie the mechanics into the educational content in a way that makes sense and isn't just like unlocking another wall of text. And that's really important, that instead of the educational material being a reward, it should be incorporated within the game theme, the game mechanic, the game design. All of that should be incorporated in the education.
No, thanks for sharing that. Amazing. Okay, for the next question we have here, what have you learned about the Horizon players that surprised you? Like, what have you learned about some of the players that surprised you? And what Horizon specific advice could you offer based on that?
I think one of the biggest surprises for me when I first started playing around in Horizon Worlds was how sociable everyone is. Because when you're in VR, like you feel like you're really mingling with the people. And one of the biggest surprises was landing in a world, having someone walk up to me and say, "Hey, how's it going? Welcome to my world. Do you want me to take you for a look around?" And I was blown away that it was just super friendly, super nice, very, very community like focused, like it, and all of the sort of the world hops and the events, all of that stuff. It just shows you how tight this community is, and I think that was one of my biggest like wow moments in Horizon Worlds, which is seeing how tight the community is. So leveraging that as a thing to think about when you're making games. Remember that. See if you can use that as a jumping point for designing a game or adding to a game, knowing that people come into your world together, or they come into your world to meet new people, and using ways in your game to drive those people to meet each other. Use it like your game is an icebreaker as much as it's a game. So one thing I really like to think about is a game where there's lots of different jobs. So if one person arrives in the world, they could do anything they want. They could, I don't know. Let's say it's a farming game, or like Lyrical's the burger joint that Lyrical made is a lovely example of this. But like, there's loads of different things you can do. You can kind of pick and choose what you want to do. But the most fun comes when you've got like a manager, you got someone on the fryer, you've got someone making the burgers, frying the, someone serving customers. Like I mean, I've had that experience in that specific world where I've been working in a team of people that I've literally just met. I've been interviewed by a manager and then set to work at the fryer. So like that's a great example of thinking about who the audience is and knowing that they want to meet people, they want to hang out, they like sharing the experience with their friends, they like making new friends, and they're using that game as an icebreaker or as just a way to do something together, and thinking about that when you're designing your game. So I like the idea of lots of optional jobs. You don't have to do everything, but then you can be on your own in the world and just do one thing at a time. But it's really, really fun when you've got lots of people and you're all working together.
Amazing. Love that response. Are there resources you recommend, like courses or YouTube channels or people for content, like what you've been just discussing throughout this session? Like, I mean, I think it's just more around what are your favorite online resources or people or channels that people can just go to learn about game design in general?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of resources, so I'm a bit of a sucker for reading. I love reading game theory books. So like, yeah. So hopefully some of these some might be interesting to people. I think I've mentioned some of them before, but like you've got the Book of Lenses about game design by Jesse Shell. That is a really good book. And there's actually a pack of cards you can get for the lenses, because the book is like very big and very long, and it's got these lenses in it that are like different ways of viewing your game, like the lens of surprise, for example. Like, how can you incorporate more surprise into your game? It's a really powerful way to think about your game, because it gets you thinking whilst you're making it of all these different, ways in that people are going to have, and things that you can sprinkle amongst what you're making already. But the cards are quite fun to just like pull a random one out every now and then, read it, and then go, okay, how can I incorporate that in my game, or how can I build a game from that idea? So that one, Raf Costa's Theory of Fun, I've already suggested, and that's really focused on education and games. It's less like and a bit of game design about how to like drip feed mechanics and gate things and all of that kind of stuff. There's another good book that I really like called Game Design Patterns, which is more like a way of thinking about game mechanics and design patterns. The idea came from like architecture patterns and ways of designing spaces, but it's kind of like, if you find a pattern that works in games, then you can kind of write about it in a nice way, and you can learn by playing yourself. So what I really like about that one is it's encouraging you to go and experiment yourself, but also learning how to critically evaluate what you're playing whilst you're playing it. The other thing I would say is actually on that is just like playing games, not necessarily just going and playing anything, and just because it's an easy trap to fall into, playing a game and then getting really into the game and not really thinking about it critically. Play all sorts of games, play bad games and good games, because bad games you can learn loads of stuff about how not to do things from bad games. If you can pinpoint why you're not enjoying a game, that's really powerful, because then like, oh, this is the sort of thing that actually detracts from the enjoyment of a game. I'll try and avoid that in the future. So playing a real mixture of good and bad games, loads of different genres, and thinking about what you're feeling whilst you're playing it, thinking about how that's another really good point, actually. When you're designing your game or building your game, and you've got something like, I don't know, I want my player to have health. How do I tell my player how much health they have? This is a design problem. And you can just do what you've always done, or you can go away and you can play a bunch of games that have health mechanics, and look at how they display that information. And you can pick and choose like what works, what doesn't work. It's not about like completely taking the exact thing and just putting it in your game. It's more about like figuring out the essence of why that's working, and incorporating that in your game. So that's like as well as the books, playing games, and then obviously making games and learning from people that are playing them as well. I do follow a really good YouTube level designer who runs level design jams, called Steve Lee, I think. Just because I've got like a penchant for level design, and I love it. It's a really fun way into game design as well. So the way he approaches it is like using Notepad to create a level. So you're writing the experience that a player has. And I would thoroughly recommend diving into some of his videos, because there's a lot of YouTube content about game design, but there's not so much YouTube content about the process of making a game and how to like actually incorporate what you're learning from these game design things into what you're actually building. And he encourages practice. Horizon Worlds is an amazing place to practice making levels and making games, and you can take what he's talking about and literally apply it straight away to what you're making. So I think that's a bunch of resources. Hopefully that gets some people fired up with some of the areas that I'm coming from anyway, the books that I like.
What is your work stream process when starting off and taking an idea or a concept in your head to implementation? Like what does it look like? Do you, for example, outline the game that you want to build and then just jump right into like implementation, or do you worry about details later? Like, just help walk us through what your process in building an actual game looks like from ideation to completion.
Sure. So the first thing is you're never starting with a blank page, although it sometimes feels like that. You're always starting from your players and what who you have in mind, what you're going to be making, who's it for. You also it might be that you get inspired by a story or a game mechanic or some art or whatever it is. So firstly, not really starting from a blank page, trying to use all the resources you have to look at something creative. Once you start designing a game, the core thing is what is someone gonna do second to second in the game? What are they gonna do minute to minute in the game? And what are they gonna do hour to hour? Or another way to think about that is what's gonna give them a reason to come back. So start outlining those things. A game isn't a theme. A game isn't a story. A game is what they're actually doing in the minute-to-minute stuff. It can be totally influenced by the theme or the story or whatever it is. It might be that's the essential experience you're trying to communicate. But in order to help break that down into game mechanics, thinking about what someone's going to be doing when they arrive, what's their second to second. Once I've got that, and it's usually writing and scribbles, it could even just be a diagram. It doesn't have to be fully fledged. Once I've got that, the next step for me is to prototype. In the dirtiest, most horrible, broken thing that I hope never sees the light of day, it's that's the prototype. It's not about making it squeaky clean or getting across the story or anything at this point. It's literally just that. It's just like a very basic prototype. White boxes everywhere. You're literally just trying to get that second to second gameplay actually working. Because until you've got that working, you have no idea whether it's actually fun. It might feel like it's going to be a good idea in your head, but until you've got that prototype, there's no way of knowing that it's working. And once you've built that prototype, you're then at the stage where you're checking it and seeing how fun it is. And that's where you start tweaking. And you're playing around with different ideas that you might have had when you were coming up with those mechanics. Or it might actually inspire you to change the mechanic or turn it on its head or remove something that's bothering you. So that's the reason that it's not you're not going in and you're making a level. You're going in and you're making this really, really basic mechanic. And what you're looking for is for that few seconds to just feel satisfying, feel a bit fun. Once you've got this basic prototype of a game mechanic, you're then looking to build that into what I do anyway. This isn't everyone. Anyway, everyone's creative process is different, and actually that's part of the beauty of games and game design. But what I like to do next, after making a prototype, is aim for a vertical slice, which is the idea that you've got the second to second, minute to minute, and maybe some of the hour to hour sort of retention stuff ideas in the game, with a slice of polished visual, not like a whole world. You're looking for 30 seconds to sort of explore what this idea looks like. That part actually takes a significant amount of time, because once you've got the mechanic and you start building out the theme, the world, the story, the sort of ideas around that, you will find yourself playing your game just as much as you're building your game. So it can end up taking a lot longer. because you're getting a feel to find out what the essential experience is that you're actually making. And until you've got that sort of vertical slice, it can really change. You can drop it, you could go and work on something else, you could change the mechanics significantly, you could change the theme. I don't want it to be sci-fi, I'm going to make it underwater. Whatever it is, like you're still in the early stages where you can change things easily. But once you've got that vertical slice and you've proved to yourself that this is like a fun game, it's got some legs in terms of retention mechanics and things like that, then it stops being necessarily like, let's change it, and starts being, build the world out, start to like really elaborate on it, get more like of the longer term quests and stuff in, tweak the second to second core gameplay mechanic stuff, and make it feel really fulfilling, satisfying, really fun, and build that up. And then once you've got to that point, that's after that bit, when you've got the world and you've got the game and you've got the mechanics working, this is the really fun part where you could launch it right now, but you don't. Instead, you spend weeks polishing it, because that first launch is like super important, and you want the game to be the best it can possibly be. And the polishing part is just all about adding layers and layers and layers of fulfilling, satisfying stuff, like feedback that the player's done something awesome, points, your in-game economy, whatever it is, and just like amping it up so that when a player presses a button, they feel amazing because like they've just pressed the button and there's like loads of sound effects and something's exploded and then a dragon's taken off. Like just like adding all of that layers and layers and layers of polish so that when it launches, it's like, whoa, this is amazing. So that's essentially my workflow. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, that's really helpful and very insightful. I mean, if I'm a game dev, I'm going to like pick some of those nuggets and start implementing that. But yeah, that was really helpful. We just have a minute left, or how I wish we can take more questions, but we'll take one more question, Andy, and then we'll continue this conversation in chat and with the creators. I'm sure they will have even more even after this session. The last question I'm going to take for today will be, as creators in Horizon World, would you recommend building a vast multiverse of different worlds, or focus on just on one world? Multiverse of different worlds, or just focus on just one world as a creator?
How big's the team? It's like there's one question I have straight away. I think so this is what I would do. I would start with one and see how well it does. I think that having an idea to build a huge universe of loads of different worlds is awesome. And you should definitely keep hold of that as a core idea. Just having the idea of having, I don't know, a single aesthetic, for example, that is all across loads of different worlds. I think if you can get one game out and it does really, really well, then you can start thinking about adding another world. And that, how do I add a second world, can be a really fun, awesome creative exercise, because you could go, well, it needs to look exactly the same, but be, slightly different, or play in a different world or whatever. Or it could look completely differently, but have the same sort of mechanics. So like finding that link between the two. I really like it when worlds are like in the same universe, but not necessarily like mechanically the same. Like in this world you do X, in this world you do Y. And I think Kawaii's done an amazing job with the Kawaii creator sort of universe, at like essentially going for this, and like, it started with one world and then another and then another. You're in a Kawaii creator world when you arrive because of the aesthetic, but they're all very different, different like mechanics and different ideas. But yeah, and also another thing I love about that sort of universe is the sort of the in-game economy. That's kind of like you can earn stuff and spend it elsewhere and things like that. So Yeah, definitely start with one if you haven't made one, but I feel like most people here have made one. Lovely to have ambitious ideas like a multi-world project, but like prove out that you can do one or in that multi-world project. And it's okay to have like coming soon and like, you know, ideas for other worlds, and sprinkles of that in this first world that you make. That's cool to do that, but just focus on one really, really well polished world first. If it does well, you know you can then start to embark on other ones. Another creator that is really good for this is I think Michael Gregory II with like all of the different escape rooms. Like it feels like they're in a universe of escape rooms, which is great fun. But like they're thematically very, very different. So there's another way you can take it. So yeah, and yeah, I thought I'd just add that as well.
Wow. Thank you so much, Andy. This was amazing. Thank you so much. I'm sure our creators have learned a lot from just hearing you like pour your insights and wisdom on this call. And I'd love this to continue, but I mean, we are working with time here. Thanks again, everyone, for making this happen. This was awesome, and we can't wait to see you next time. Bye for now.